Captain's log, stardate 3142.3. Slightly over 2 centuries ago, a group of scientists planned for a race of supermen and created conquistadors.
Name? Khan Noonien Singh.
From 1992 through 1996, absolute ruler of more than a quarter of your world.
Well, either choke me or cut my throat.
You fled. Why? Were you afraid?
I've never been afraid.
But you left at the very time mankind needed courage.
We offered the world order. I intend to take this ship.
Will you assist me?
Oh, please, God, don't ask me.
Leave me then. The battle begins again. Only this time is not the world who will win. It's the universe. Buddy, you're no match for me. It does not matter. The captain is dead.
Hi everyone and welcome to Geekfest Rants. My name is Steve Avona, and today I'm going to be providing an audio commentary for the classic Star Trek episode Space Seed. A historic episode in the canon of Star Trek, and one that eventually ensured its future survival. Now before we get started, I want to put something right out there. I'm a rabid Trek fan, but there are plenty of you out there more well-versed in the minutiae of Trek than I. I've endeavored to do my homework, and if I've missed anything, I'm sure you'll let me know. If you're not as well-versed as I, then hopefully I'll share a tidbit or two previously unbeknownst to you. More importantly, I'd like to share my history with Star Trek with you, and how critical this episode is to my involvement with Trek and my continuing love for it. You cannot underestimate its importance in the Trek canon, and it's also pivotal to my love of Trek. This is the episode that introduced Khan Noonien Singh, as played by Ricardo Montalban, a character who had an unexpected resurgence as the villain of Star Trek II. It can be argued that the future of the Star Trek franchise hinged on the success or failure of that film. Had it failed, the last 30 years of Trek might never have come to pass. So let's get started. As always, I will provide you with a visual cue to get us on our way. Right now, I should also indicate I'm watching the Blu-ray edition of Space Seed with the enhanced visual effects. So right now, I'm at the menu for Space Seed, and my cursor is over View Episode with Enhanced Effects, and I will hit play now. And we're in. And we have a lovely shot of the new CGI Enterprise done by Mike Okuda's team at CBS Digital. And I don't know how scene-specific I'm going to be with this commentary. Obviously, I'll try to point things out as I go along in my discussion. I really want to also talk about my relationship to Trek and how it's evolved over the years. This episode is extremely important to my love of Star Trek. I grew up as a child of George Lucas. I was 7 years old when Star Wars was released, and it took over my consciousness in a way nothing ever had. I really had no interest in Star Trek. My father was a rabid fan. There's the Botany Bay. My father was a rabid fan who tried to impress upon me how great Star Trek was, but I wasn't having any of it. I can't really explain my rationale at the time as a child. I can only say that it probably, the look of it as compared to Star Wars, I found wanting. I also think that every time it seemed like Dad put it on, there was some loathsome third season episode on, and something like Spock's Brain or Plato's Stepchildren or God forbid, And the Children Shall Lead. So events were just conspiring against me getting into Trek. The release of Star Trek the Motion Picture in 1979, it did nothing to help the situation. Again, Dad took me to see it. There's a lovely shot of the Enterprise coming up alongside the Botany Bay, which in the old or the original configuration of the episode looked like an egg beater. But anyway, my dad took me to see Star Trek the Motion Picture in a second-run theater, and I fell asleep. I was 9 years old, and the story was just beyond me. I thought it was boring. And even though the effects were impressive, there was none of that great interplay between the characters, very little of it. There might have been hints of it, but it was really doing nothing to impress a 9-year-old who already sort of had a bias against Trek. So that could have been it right there. But Star Trek II came out. Now, 3 years later, it's 1982. I'm a little older, a little bit more mature in my tastes, maybe not much. Obviously, The Empire Strikes Back had also come out. So, still completely wrapped up in Star Wars and completely excited for Return of the Jedi to come out the following year. But I guess that we had a little bit of an in-between time between Star Wars movies. Dad took me to see Star Trek II, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. It had great action, but I think I was starting to like the characters, that all that interplay and all that banter that the original series was known for between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy was there. I was getting it. The story, again, even for a 12-year-old, I really hooked into its themes of mortality, of getting old, and it was just a completely different experience for me. And I was, I guess, open to Trek. I still wasn't quite there yet. I wasn't a fan. So at the time, the original series was syndicated on WPIX Channel 11 in New York, and I lived in the tri-state area, so that would be the channel I would see it on. There's some really great byplay there between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and this episode has quite a bit of it. After I saw Star Trek II, my father said, well, he was on in an episode prior. I knew nothing of the backstory of Khan. For all I knew, that was a character they created specifically for the movie that Kirk had met off screen. I had no idea. That's Madeline Rue as ship's historian Marla McGivers, a very, very beautiful woman, if I may say. And we'll talk about Madeline in a second. But just to kind of quickly wrap this up, WPIX had a special airing of Space Seed. I had definitely seen Trek 2. So my father said, you should see this episode. It'll really enhance your enjoyment of the movie. So even though it was a little bit backwards, I watched it. And, we're talking about a great first season episode here with all the ingredients that made Star Trek wonderful. And I was like, wow, this isn't so bad. I'm finally seeing a good episode of the series. It's enhancing my interest in Star Trek in general. I'm really becoming open to it. Now, I can't honestly say that right then and there I became hooked. That happened when I saw Star Trek 3. That cemented everything for me, and I really hope that my colleagues and I get to do a commentary for Trek 3, because even though it's part of the sort of odd-numbered curse of Trek films, I'm really looking forward to that commentary, because that's the one that really put me over the top in terms of loving Trek. So, but it's critical. Space Seed is absolutely critical to my involvement with the series. Now, the landing party is just beamed over to the Botany Bay with MacGyvers, who's supposed to give Kirk a sense of who these people might be, and obviously we've never seen her before. Madeline Rue had a very long career in television and film, primarily television. And it's interesting to note that she worked with Ricardo Montalban 3 times. Obviously on Space Seed. She was on an episode of Fantasy Island. And they were also on an episode of Bonanza together, where they played husband and wife. So they had 3 noteworthy appearances together on screen. But I would say that this one is the the finest. Madeline Rue made over 100 appearances on television. And besides being on Trek, she was on Have Gun Will Travel, The Untouchables, Gunsmoke, Hawaii Five-0, Man from U.N.C.L.E., Mission Impossible. She was on a soap opera called Executive Suite. As I noted, she was on the episode of Bonanza with Ricardo Montalban. In film, she was in Operation Petticoat, which starred Cary Grant, A Majority of One, which also co-starred George Takei. She was in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. And sadly, she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 1977. And according to at least one source that I've managed to find, Harve Bennett wanted her to appear in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, but since her condition precluded her, she was still working at the time, but she was confined to a wheelchair. So obviously she couldn't fulfill the constraints of the role, so he just wrote her out rather than recast the role, which I thought was nice of him. So she's an off-screen presence in Trek 2, but she's there. Oh, there goes Kirk's phaser just fell off his belt as he is going to rescue Khan from his sleep chamber. Can always count on Jim Kirk to act in a decisive manner. So there is Ricardo Montalban, a wonderful character actor, if you'd like to say, who was active for more than 6 decades on film and in television. One of the few Mexican actors to achieve the kind of stature that he had. Sadly, it was very difficult for him to break free of ethnic roles. He obviously was of Spanish descent, but he managed to play a real diversity of ethnic roles. Here we have him playing Khan Noonien Singh, who is, as MacGyver's points out, a Sikh. He played Japanese. He played American Indian. You know, it's just so ironic that he wasn't able to sort of break free of the ethnic stereotype. He was an extremely talented actor, by all accounts, a very charming man. And it's not to say that he didn't have a very successful career. He obviously did, but he was obviously put under constraints and limitations by the casting machine in Hollywood. And it's just interesting, you know, to think about what he might have accomplished had he not been pigeonholed into those type of roles. His portrayal of Khan is, I think he's the finest Star Trek villain ever. And it's interesting to sort of talk about him in Space Seed and talk about him in Wrath of Khan and see how the character evolves. In Space Seed, yes, he's arrogant, he's chauvinistic, he is shrewd, but his 15 years in exile bring out all the really terrible qualities. I mean, obviously, he's furious at what's happened. You know, his wife has died. The planet that Kirk exiled him to was not the planet. Obviously, after 6 months, this other planet, you know the story of Star Trek II. I'm sure everybody who is listening to this commentary knows what happened to the planet that he was exiled to. And then he was forced to live in a barren wasteland for 15 years with nothing but a seething hatred for Kirk. So when he emerges, he's all those tendencies towards, I guess, megalomania are front and center. So here's a little byplay between Nimoy and Shatner. It's interesting to note also the close friendship that William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy enjoy today. really was not there during the original series. And it's been it's been noted that there was a feud between them, and I think the feud was more on Shatner's side than Nimoy's side, because the Spock character really crept up in terms of popularity. Shatner was ostensibly the star of the show, but Spock was the breakout character, and that irritated Mr. Shatner no end. And he had been seen by many people, including Mark Daniels, the director of this episode, crossing out Spock's lines in the script wherever he saw fit to do that. And I assume he had the cachet to do that and get away with it, but he would ruin scenes when that happened. If he was going to take dialogue away from Mr. Nimoy, that could just completely upend a scene and it would be rendered incoherent. And they may have to rely on facial expression or hand gesture or something to get the point across. Now, we can see here that MacGyver's is completely taken with Khan, almost in a schoolgirl crush kind of way. No, professionally, yeah, that's sure. Yeah. Okay, Marla, we know you have the hots for him. And throw your career down the toilet for him. Which I'm also sure that doesn't make the captain happy. He's used to his officers throwing themselves at him, and here he's got a little competition. It's also been said that there are parallels between the character of Kirk and Khan is seen as a version of Kirk without the controls. McCoy's writing on his Etch-a-Sketch. So, Khan is... maybe he's got a little hibernation sickness, like Han Solo in Return of the Jedi. He's doing a little Tai Chi to get himself back on an even keel, it looks like. Of course, you can obviously see that Ricardo was in great shape. In Star Trek II, there was a commotion over whether or not the chest that we saw him sporting was prosthetic. But Nicholas Meyer has said up and down every time he's asked if that in fact was Ricardo Montalban's true physique, and he says yes, it absolutely was. I'm really glad that Montalban had the opportunity to reprise Khan and be remembered for something other than Mr. Rourke or his Chrysler Cordoba commercials, because there was a danger that those things would overshadow a really wonderful career. Towards the end of his life, Robert Rodriguez put him in the Spy Kids films, so that brought him to a new generation. But the unexpected call that he got from Harve Bennett to reprise Khan, it must have thrown him for quite a loop. And this is in the midst of a Fantasy Island, and he was probably at his height in terms of popularity. But this character was definitely one worth reprising, and Harve Bennett, he deserves so much credit for seeing the potential in this story. It was really just rife for a sequel. Everyone knows that Harve Bennett screened all 79 episodes of the original Star Trek series and came upon Space Seed as one that could be one that had a story that could be continued. And you just can't underestimate the contribution of Harve Bennett. I think that were it not for him, Were it not for Star Trek II, you just wouldn't have everything else that followed. Star Trek II was a hit, and that begat more feature films, and Star Trek was popular in the mid-'80s to late 80s, and so popular that they called Gene Roddenberry back and said, let's put it back on TV, and Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise. However you feel about those series and their quality, Star Trek kept growing and growing and growing until it finally imploded in the early 2000s. But, if we don't have Star Trek II, if we don't have Harv Bennett, and if we don't have Ricardo Montalban, we don't have everything that followed. So here we're getting a little sense of Khan's arrogance and his grudging respect, I think, that he has for Kirk. The byplay between the two of them develops as the episode goes on, and it's really great. They have, one might regret the fact that they didn't have any scenes together in Star Trek II, or that they were just reading lines off of a screen. William Shatner and Ricardo Montalban had no scenes together in Star Trek II physically, at the same time in the same place. But I think it was all said and done in Space Seed. And I kind of like the fact that they're separated in Star Trek II. Now, one of the things I find a little confusing is the fact that Kirk is so giving of information. He wants to keep Khan entertained, and obviously he doesn't quite know who he is yet. But I would have thought that his radar would have been touched off by now, that he is not someone to be trusted. He had the little incident with McCoy and, holding the scalpel to his throat, and just the posturing that's going on in that scene. I'm just surprised that Kirk is willing to give him sort of access and free reign over the technical manuals and all the data that the Enterprise has to offer. So here we have Kirk and Spock conferring. And I really love the interplay between Shatner and Nimoy. As I alluded to before, you would never have the sense that there was any friction between the two of them, but that's the story that's told, and their friendship didn't develop until much later on in life. They're inseparable now, and that's great. But Nimoy's fan mail was twice as much as Shatner's, and things like that. I don't want to take anything away from him as an actor, but Shatner has a massive, massive ego, and I'm sure as a young man it was so much bigger than it is today. He was fighting for his life as an actor. He was well known. He had been in films. He had been on Broadway. But now he was carrying his own show, and he really probably thought who he was. So now MacGyver's is meeting Khan for the first time. I wonder if in all his reading, Khan learned about the Klingons and the Klingon proverbs that, he was spouting in Star Trek II. I don't know if the Botany Bay was equipped with any current history, if they gave them anything when they booted them off the ship in terms of current Federation history. And yes, we all know that Mr. Chekhov is not, or I should say Walter Koenig, was not a cast member when this season, during this season. So the fact that he recognizes Khan has been sort of done to death on the convention circuit. Walter Koenig has stated he had stomach virus, and Khan saw him in the lavatory when he caught the stomach virus, and he said he would never forget him. Now, it's also, I think, interesting to note how MacGyver's is just so ready to kind of give herself over to this man. She is enthralled by him, and she just kind of throws all her training and her sense of duty and obligation out the window as the episode goes on. She's just so completely enraptured by Khan. And I suppose as the way the character was set up, seeing her painting portraits of powerful men, that to have one of them actually come alive, I suppose it is plausible that could happen. There's a nice lighting on Madeline there. It's one of my favorite scenes. I don't know what they're supposed to be eating. I've never really paid attention to the accoutrements on the table before the Blu-ray. Got some swans there, and God only knows what they're supposed to be eating. Almost looks like a fruit cup. Some portraits on the wall, some abstract 23rd century art. And they're wearing their dress uniforms, which you would see from time to time. Khan is getting... This is the scene, I think, where Khan realizes that it's going to be no difficult task to bend her to his will. It's going to just take very little provocation for her to come over to his side and be his pawn. Like I said, I do find it hard to believe that MacGyver's would betray her comrades so easily. But she does waffle on that later in the episode. There is a sort of smoldering tension between the two of them. And she's all his. I also find it interesting that Kirk has not divined yet Khan's true identity. That it takes a little bit more time for them to get get all the data on Khan. This is a great... The whole notion that Kirk is letting Spock draw him out and drinking in all his characteristics and possibly looking for weaknesses, as Khan is later going to remark. I just love the look on Kirk's face and his eyes right there. And there you can see that there is a respect. Another great line coming up right now. And now Kirk goes on the attack. and he's betraying his true nature. He's going to grow fatigued again. There were 3 Star Trek novels featuring Khan by Greg Cox. The novels were published by Pocket Books. And I tried to read the first one. It didn't work for me. There were too many coincidences, I felt. I always wanted them to talk about the eugenics wars and that stuff, but this guy threw in every character but the kitchen sink. I mean, you had Gary Seven, and you had Gillian Taylor, and you had this one and that one, and it just seemed too much, almost like stunt casting for a movie, and it really was unnecessary. And I didn't get halfway through the first book. And they talk about what happened. It talks about Khan's rise to power, and then it also talks about his exile on Ceti Alpha 5. I'm not saying don't read them, but they just weren't my cup of tea. I love the mind games that Khan plays with MacGyver's. It's just so obvious that he has her wrapped around his little finger, and she is really just gaga for him. And again, you're talking, we're supposed to be really progressive here in the 23rd century, and I didn't think that the battle of the sexes was still going on, but she just is giving herself over to him in a way that you just wouldn't expect a woman, who has who's serving on the Federation flagship. Space Seed was written by Carrie Wilbur, and the original plot treatment had Khan as a Nordic Superman named Harold Erickson. Obviously, these scripts, they go through many iterations. You can, one of the most famous is City on the Edge of Forever. Harlan Ellison has been bitching about it for the last 40 years, how his script was changed. But they're going to go through several drafts before they get to their final stage. The first draft of the script included the character as John Erickson, who was revealed to be a man involved in the First World Tyranny. The character, by the time of the final draft, Khan was of Indian ancestry. Now we know who Khan is. Khan Noonien Singh. It's nice too during this sequence that they're including Scotty in their deliberations, and it's a great scene showing their, I guess, humanity. They're showing Spock how they can respect a man while at the same time, acknowledging that he's a villain. It's just a great scene for Nimoy to bounce off of them. And like I said, it's nice to see Jimmy Doohan being included in the deliberations. Now Kirk is going to confront him. Khan has a nice red shirt on. He's got a red shirt. The Botany Bay was named after an Australian penal colony that undesirables were shipped off. Undesirables from the British Empire were shipped off to. They tamed and founded the country of Australia. And there's a clear parallel here with what Kirk does to Khan at the end of this episode. In the original draft of Space Seed, Harold Erickson assaulted Captain Kirk and was subdued and placed in the brig with the other survivors. Erickson had committed a murder to prevent crew members on the Enterprise from learning the truth about him, captured the Enterprise, and intended to become a pirate using the starship. When Marlowe was in danger of being shot during a phaser fight involving Kirk, Erickson surrendered and accepted his fate. Here we go. Khan is escaping. You get a sense of his great strength. I believe that's John Winston as Commander Kyle. So with MacGyver's help, Khan has now freed the surviving crew members of the Botany Bay. Now he's wearing his uniform, whatever that is supposed to signify. Now the Botany Bay took off from Earth in 1996. So I don't think anybody had any clue that Star Trek would survive another 30, 40 years and that we would pass the time of the eugenics wars. It's nice to know that we weren't quite as barbaric and savage a race as postulated by Carrie Wilbur and Gene Kuhn, who actually developed the script for the episode at the final version of the script. Gene Kuhn, the showrunner of Star Trek, is often referred to as the Forgotten Gene. And I think that he deserves so much credit. You know, when we talk about the success of Star Trek, it's very easy to talk about Gene Roddenberry and leave out names like Gene Kuhn and Bob Justman and Mark Daniels. And you know, these are the people who really were working on the show day in and day out. You know, who brought Gene Roddenberry's vision to life. You know, Gene was sort of the overall. I mean, yeah, you can't take away anything from Gene. You know, creating this concept, but as the series wore on, he was less of a day-to-day presence. Gene Kuhn produced the first season of the original series from the episode Miri to Operation Annihilate, and the second season from Catspaw to Bread and Circuses. During his tenure, the Klingons were introduced in Errand of Mercy. The governing body, the United Federation of Planets, got its name. Starfleet Command was firmly established as the Enterprise's operating authority, and the Prime Directive was first articulated. Kuhn did many rewrites on the scripts, and he was known for his ability to crank out scripts in a very short period of time. Sadly, Gene Kuhn died of cancer in July of 1973 at the age of 49. So it's kind of easy to see how his name sort of got, I guess, lost in the shuffle. He died during that sort of interim period when Star Trek was dormant, except for the animated series. And he didn't live to see the success of the films and the further television series. But as I said, you just can't talk about Star Trek and the success of Star Trek without talking about Gene Coon, who, in addition to all the other things I mentioned, under a pseudonym, Lee Cronin, he wrote several episodes in Star Trek's third season, including the lamentable Spock's Brain, Spectre of the Gun, Wink of an Eye, and Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. He wrote, as Gene Coon, Devil in the Dark, Arena, Errand of Mercy, Space Seed, Metamorphosis, A Piece of the Action, one of my all-time favorites, and Bread and Circuses. His scripts really brought out the best in Star Trek. They contained strong moral lessons concerning personal redemption, an opposition to war. He also created Zephram Cochrane, who developed warp drive. In addition to Star Trek, he wrote scripts for Dragnet, Bonanza, Zorro, Have Gun Will Travel, Wagon Train, and The Wild Wild West. Now, Khan he's pretty much captured the Enterprise, and now he's holding Kirk hostage in some sort of a pressure chamber that he's hoping will cause one of his crew to break and give him the information that he needs when they see that their commander is suffering. And that's really a shrewd way to get what he wants. Space Seed was directed by Mark Daniels, who directed several episodes of Star Trek, several noteworthy episodes of Star Trek, including The Man Trap, Naked Time, The Menagerie, Court Martial, Who Mourns for Adonais, Changeling, Mirror Mirror, Doomsday Machine, I Mud, Private Little War, By Any Other Name, Assignment Earth, Spock's Brain. Mark Daniels mastered live television directing and was hired to direct the first 38 episodes of I Love Lucy, along with cinematographer Carl Freund, who had a background directing films himself and directed Universal's The Mummy with Boris Karloff. Daniels was credited with introducing the 3-camera technique of filming as opposed to the conventional 1-camera. I think what's interesting to note as Leonard Nimoy gets up and walks to his supposed doom is that Khan is outsmarted not only by the fact that he's betrayed by MacGyvers, but again, we're dealing with a situation that harms him in Star Trek 2, that he doesn't know the ship as well as Kirk. So MacGyvers is freeing Kirk. And he's going to have his chance to retake the ship. Love the look there. And here we have a little Kirk Spock 1-2 number. So I guess you have a situation here where they repeated themselves. Khan is undone by the fact that he doesn't know these ships as well as the officers. But he manages to get away before the room is flooded with the gas. And again, the fact that Kirk and Khan are going to have a physical confrontation here, it really renders that unnecessary in Star Trek 2. I mean, William Shatner was still pretty spry, and I'm sure Montalban would have been up for it, but you don't want to be too repetitive. And now we're about to have the Battle of the Stuntmen. They really didn't even try to hide the fact that the long shots were stuntmen. I guess they also weren't thinking about the resolution of Blu-ray, but I think even back in the day when you were just watching this on a standard television in the 70s, you could tell that they were stuntmen going at it. Right there. I mean, the guy has darker hair than Shatner. I mean, right there. I mean, look at these guys. Kind of very 60s John Wayne-esque brawling. Kirk pulls out a plastic what's-this. Shatner was very athletic. I don't see why he and Montalban couldn't have done the whole fight themselves, but, insurance and all that, I'm assuming. So here we come to the final scene, the court-martial of MacGyver's, or the hearing, whatever you want to call it, the hearing. Now here again, I find it interesting that Kirk, on his own authority, decides to send Khan and his followers to this planet, basically, in essence, to take it over. It's makes for an interesting story, but I don't know that would have been Federation protocol, although Kirk was known for doing his own thing. So he throws down the gauntlet, and of course Khan is willing to accept. And again, he's allowing MacGyver's to go off with him. I mean, he's going to court-martial her if she doesn't, so there really isn't much choice. But It's fairly obvious by this episode's events that she would definitely go off with him. I can't help but think about Star Trek II as I watch this scene. I think it really was a stroke of genius on Harve Bennett's part to continue this story. Bit of rule in hell and serve in heaven. And this line is dripping with irony. You don't have to wait 100 years, you only have to wait 15 years. So there we have it, Space Seed, directed by Mark Daniels. There we go, the new CGI Enterprise. So I want to thank everyone for listening to my commentary on Space Seed. I hopefully didn't embarrass myself too much. And as I said, I wasn't setting out to be completely scene specific. I wanted to talk more about the players and my feelings about Star Trek. Hopefully I'll be doing some more in the future, more noteworthy episodes, either by myself or with my colleagues. And again, thank you for listening, and I'll see you again on Geekfest Rants. Bye-bye.
It was a time of great dreams, of great aspiration.
Under dozens of petty dictatorships.
One man would have ruled eventually. As Rome under Caesar. Think of its accomplishments.
Then your sympathies were with...
You are an excellent tactician, Captain. You let your second-in-command attack while you sit and watch for weakness.
You have a tendency to express ideas in military terms. This is a social occasion.
It has been said that social occasions are only warfare concealed. Many prefer it more honest, more open.
You fled. Why? Were you afraid?
I've never been afraid.
But you left at the very time mankind needed courage.
We offered the world order. We.
Stop.